They said she was just a wife, just a woman returning home. But 5 minutes after she stepped foot onto our land, men with guns were asking her for orders. Not questions. Orders. And the HOA Karen, who called the cops. She was already on her knees, whispering apologies she couldn't take back. They don't want you to know what really sails in with the USS Truman. They don't want you to believe a woman could carry clearance levels buried beneath black ink. Higher than senators, deeper than any civilian chain of command. But that's the first lie, and it always starts the same way, with a smile from the HOA, the kind of false pleasantry bred in suburban cages, an illusion of order masking something ancient, something far more sinister than garden regulations. Karen thought she was protecting property values. What she did was trigger a fail-safe protocol written into deep military archives that don't officially exist. What she did was try to exert civilian authority over a shadow asset trained to command fleets, and bury entire regimes with a single whispered code. The moment the police arrived, reality began to collapse. She stepped forward, not frightened, not flinching, gave them a look, not a glare, not rage, just knowing, and they changed. These weren't men anymore. They were soldiers under something they couldn't name. You could see it in their hands, guns down, eyes wide, radios silent. They didn't ask her who she was, they asked for her orders. And that's when I knew this wasn't about a lake, or trespassing, or HOA politics. This was about control, the illusion of it, and the truth of what lies beneath it. Because what my wife brought back from the Truman wasn't luggage, it was knowledge classified, scorched in soul-altering knowledge. Something older than this nation, yet encrypted into its veins. She wasn't just my wife, she was a carrier of forbidden truths. And now, I'll show you what she showed me. But, be warned. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Once you see it, the mask will never fit again. And once you know what's behind that mask, you'll never trust the system again. Welcome to the descent. They buried the real Constitution beneath 7 layers of code and countercode. The one they handed to you in school. That's theater. A distraction. A decoy for the masses. The true document, the one my wife carried in fragments, locked inside a neural lattice behind her retina, was never meant for public eyes. It was written not on paper, but encoded through bloodlines, preserved by those born into corridors you'll never see on a map. I remember sitting across from her that night. The moonlight caught her dog tags, but those weren't military issue. They were etched with an alphabet I didn't recognize, symbols that looked older than Latin, older than Greek, almost Sumerian, but not quite. They hummed, faintly. And when I reached for them, I felt it, a vibration under the skin. She looked at me and said, "You've seen the face of the Republic. Now I'll show you its spine." Then she opened the case. Not a weapon, not documents, a map. But not of land, a map of systems. Invisible systems. Psychological frameworks engineered to keep men weak, distracted, obedient. It detailed the cycles of media control, pharmaceutical sedation, and education as domestication. The blueprint of engineered compliance. There it was, names of senators, think tanks, legacy families, corporate dynasties stretching back before America existed. You've heard of 3-letter agencies. She showed me the 0-letter group. The architects who don't speak, they whisper instructions through currency, culture, and chaos. And Karen, she was just a byproduct. A symptom of the control grid. A suburban enforcement node. A biological repeater station for empire's sanitized fear. But here's the part that chills me: that map wasn't printed. It grew, living ink. Synthetic neural fiber woven into it, reacting to light, heat, even emotion. I watched it pulse when she touched it. I watched it erase and reappear based on her biometric rhythm. It knew who she was, and it responded only to her. That's when I realized she didn't serve in the Navy. The Navy served her. Understand the chain of command. You haven't even seen the real leash yet, but you will. Keep listening, because by the time we're done, you won't just question reality. You'll know who built it, and who's still writing the script. They call it continuity of government, but that's just a euphemism. A decoy phrase designed to comfort civilians while the real machinery churns underneath. What my wife revealed wasn't continuity, it was possession. After the Second Gulf War, entire layers of command were quietly severed from traditional oversight. Not just beneath the Pentagon's lowest sub-basements, beneath even the data centers nobody's allowed to acknowledge, lies something called Project HECATE. It's not an acronym. It's a name stolen from an ancient goddess of thresholds, crossroads, and necromancy. And it still functions. Not through cables or terminals, but through human vessels, specially selected, brutally trained, and psychically keyed operatives, descendants of lineages that stretch into black dynastic families older than most nations. These operatives don't need orders. They are the orders. Asterisk, my wife wasn't returning from deployment. She was returning from activation. Asterisk, that HOA Karen. She had no idea. She thought she was confronting some Navy spouse, breaking some invisible rule about parking or lake access. But her shout, her civilian assertion of authority triggered something embedded in my wife's neural net. A security failsafe, and not the kind you can cancel with a badge number. Asterisk, 5 minutes later, the cops were pale. Not out of fear, out of confusion. Their brains were trained for chaos, but not this kind. One of them kept glancing at her shoulder, even though her uniform was long gone. He asked if she had reassumed status. Asterisk, she didn't answer. She didn't have to. You ever seen grown men straighten up like puppets pulled by invisible strings? That wasn't respect. That was protocol. Instinctual obedience bred into institutions, older than the cities they patrol. And here's what they don't tell you. Behind every department, every agency, every public-facing authority, there's a secondary script, an override, a whisper channel that kicks in when the illusion breaks. When someone like her shows up, and in that moment, Karen's voice stopped working. Asterisk, literally. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. She kept pointing, screaming in silence. Something had cut her off, not physically, but technologically, dampened, neutralized. Asterisk, because the grid she thought protected her. It wasn't hers to command, it was always theirs. You don't live in a democracy. You live in a managed perception sphere. And the managers don't wear suits. They wear silence. We're not even close to the bottom yet. Asterisk, but, if you're still with me, good, because the next door opens downward. Asterisk, you ever wonder why your phone listens to you, but you still feel unheard? Why your smart TV watches you, but you don't remember turning it on? It's not paranoia. It's protocol. Asterisk, and it started with Operation Glinter, Cold War project buried so deep inside the naval intelligence files that even DARPA referred to it as ghost code. It wasn't about spying on the Soviets. Asterisk, it was about building a framework to catalog every human mind on the grid. But here's the twist. They didn't just want to know what you were thinking. They wanted to shape it. See, every word you say, every hesitation, every blink, scroll, swipe, it's all data. And data is the new weaponized blood. They figured it out decades ago, how to reverse engineer emotion into compliance. Not with bullets. With repetition. With trauma disguised as entertainment. With dopamine loops rigged like landmines inside your phone. Asterisk, my wife. She was trained to navigate that terrain without blinking. They called her a signal diver. Her job wasn't to hack systems. It was to step between them. To map the psychological architecture of population control. And disrupt it when needed. Asterisk. That's why Karen's words failed. The moment she issued a civilian-level threat, the system recognized a breach of protocol. My wife didn't speak. She didn't move. But the grid around her responded like an immune system detecting an infection. Asterisk, the HOA Karen became white noise. Asterisk, and the officers, they didn't arrest anyone. They received an incoming ping through a channel I had never heard before. One of them mumbled a phrase under his breath. Sigil blue. Open umbra, before adjusting his stance, and awaiting her nod. Asterisk, he didn't ask for ID. Asterisk, he asked for coordinates. Asterisk, now listen closely. Because this is where everything fractures. Asterisk, there are two realities operating side by side. One for you, the civilian, the tax-paying rule-following media-fed civilian, and another for them, the architects, the silent ones, the custodians of hidden continuity. My wife didn't break any laws that day. She activated one. Asterisk, one so ancient, so quietly enforced, that even Congress is beneath it. One that states, asterisk, when the veil is challenged by the uninitiated, silence shall become law, and the initiated shall resume command. That's what she did. She resumed command. Asterisk, and the illusion you thought was power. It collapsed like paper in fire. We're only beginning to uncover the layers. Asterisk, you've heard the phrase, deep state. Asterisk, but what if I told you that term was a decoy? Something simple, digestible, safe. Because the real enemy doesn't reside in think tanks or boardrooms. It doesn't hold elections. It doesn't leak. It doesn't need to. Asterisk, it's called a threshold order. Asterisk, no initials. No public face. Not even a symbol. Just a network. Woven through history like veins of black mercury beneath every empire that's ever ruled. Asterisk, Rome. A prototype. Asterisk, the crown. A puppet. Asterisk, America. An incubator. Memory M. And the threshold's specialty isn't war. It's memory manipulation. Psychological echo loops. Narrative engineering so subtle. You defend the very systems enslaving you, thinking it's patriotism, loyalty, honor. When the HOA Karen called the cops that day, she unknowingly touched a silent thread connected to the threshold's monitoring net. Not satellites. Not drones. People, biologically keyed operatives embedded in society, trained to respond to disturbances in narrative, symmetry. It's why nothing truly disruptive is allowed to last. Real protests, dissolved in scandal. Real leaders, removed by distraction. Real conversations, algorithmically buried. My wife was a breach in their pattern, because she didn't just know about the threshold order. She was trained by one of its deserters. They're called the Pale Chain, a rogue group of initiates who broke ranks decades ago. And every member of the Pale Chain is marked. Not with tattoos, with quantum scars, bioelectrical signatures that can only be detected when the subject reaches high emotional frequencies. Fear, rage, revelation. And that day, Karen triggered it. The moment she yelled, her voice hit a tonal range that unlocked a defense protocol embedded in my wife's cortex. A reaction gifted by the deserters. One not even the threshold could track, and it worked. The police's radios cut to static. A crow landed on the cruiser dead silent, and my wife spoke for the first time that day. She said, grid compromised, civilian attempting override, restoration, in progress. It wasn't a threat, it was a judgment. Karen backed away like she saw God, and maybe she did, because the look in my wife's eyes wasn't human anymore. It was the gaze of someone who'd stood beyond the veil, who'd looked into the system that controls the world, and said no. The HOA thought it ran the neighborhood. They didn't realize they were trespassing on sovereign ground. The word sovereign gets tossed around like a slogan these days, but most men have no idea what it actually means. It's not about flags. It's not about money. It's not even about independence. Sovereignty is the absence of permission, the ability to act not because you're allowed to, but because you are unalterable, because you are aligned with something older than law. And that day, when my wife stood on our land, her boots still marked with the salt of the Atlantic, she embodied that truth. The land beneath her feet recognized her. The air seemed to pause. Time bent around her like heat over metal. And that Karen, with her clipboard and sunglasses, an artificial authority, stood face to face with something she'd never imagined. A sovereign force in a world built on compliance. But here's the twist. True sovereignty is illegal in every modern nation. Not by name, but by design. Every law, every permit, every code enforcement statute is structured to drain autonomy. Slowly, quietly, legally, until all that's left is a man who obeys because he's afraid of inconvenience. Not prison, not death. Inconvenience. That's how they control you. Through endless paper cuts, through bylaws, through whispers that say, just follow the rules, and nothing bad will happen. But what if the rules were built to break you? What if your entire reality was designed to make you forget you were ever wild, ever unwound, ever sovereign? That's why my wife is dangerous. Because she didn't just resist the HOA. She nullified it. Not with violence. With presence. With identity rooted in a system older than theirs. She showed me a document later that night. No seal, no flag, just a phrase, in deep crimson ink. The sovereign shall not yield to the illusion of governance. For he governs the self, and the self is eternal. That document wasn't filed in any courthouse. It was coded into her biology. A legacy passed down through female war channelers, hidden in Navy records under non-deployable assets, but secretly trained in PSYOPs reversal, frequency command, and geospatial dominance. And when Karen challenged her, she triggered a process not even she could stop. She called the cops. But what she got was command recognition. Because when a sovereign speaks, even the enforcers kneel. Section 7. They don't shoot bullets anymore. They shoot frequencies. You don't see them. You don't hear them, but you feel them. The heaviness in your chest when you enter a shopping mall. The fog in your brain after watching 5 minutes of network news. The sudden spike of anxiety in traffic, even when nothing's wrong. That's not chance. It's by design. Welcome to the frequency war, the longest, quietest war in human history. And you've been on the front lines your entire life, without ever knowing it. My wife wasn't just trained to resist those signals. She was engineered to detect them. You see, while the world was focused on nuclear threats and cyber warfare, the real battlefield shifted into the invisible. The manipulation of the assault on your inner signal, the one that connects your mind, body, and instinct. Every modern device is a frequency agent. Your smart meter emits pulsed signals at 900 MHz, right in the range that disrupts human calcium ion flow in the brain. Your Wi-Fi router, dual band emissions that interfere with melatonin production and memory consolidation. Even your car's Bluetooth system pulses low-frequency beta waves that keep you just alert enough to consume, but too dulled to question. They call it convenience, but it's suppression wrapped in silicone and glass. Now listen closely. The HOA wasn't just enforcing neighborhood rules that day. They were an amplifier node, Karen's clipboard, embedded with a passive RFID loop designed to scan for unauthorized energy signatures, specifically sovereign biometrics. My wife's return from USS Truman wasn't random. She was carrying a countersignal, a living resonance, tuned to disrupt compliance fields and reactivate dormant DNA memory in high-frequency men like you. And when she stepped onto that land, the war began. Not with gunfire, not with words, but with a hum. A deep, bone-shaking thrum that caused the birds to vanish, the wind to still, and every surveillance drone within a 3-mile radius to cut feed. Because she wasn't just resisting the system, she was broadcasting a command frequency. That's why the cops arrived so fast. They weren't responding to Karen, they were responding to her. A sovereign has no badge, but every authority knows the signal. Now, I want you to do something dangerous. If you've felt it, if you've heard that low hum in your life, when something just didn't feel right, drop this phrase in the comments twice. The signal is mine. The signal is mine. Because when enough of us reclaim our frequency, the entire grid begins to glitch. They always said the world would end with fire, but it's not fire that ends a system built on control. It's disobedience. And on that quiet afternoon, the first crack appeared. Not in the sky, not in the street, but in the protocol. Because when the officers arrived and saw my wife standing there centered, sovereign, something in them changed. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't draw weapons. They hesitated. You see, hesitation is a forbidden act inside enforcement ranks. Training drills it out of you. They're conditioned to react, not feel. But in that moment, they felt something. A pulse. A dissonance in the air, like static behind their eyes. And that's when it happened. Their radios let out a single tone. One that doesn't exist in any known frequency chart. It's not even a sound. Not really. It's a reminder. A call embedded deep in the nervous system of every operative with clearance above protocol. 9.1 word. Echoed across all their comms. It's a code for psychic compromise. Translation. You are standing in the presence of a sovereign field. Do not engage. That's how serious this is. They didn't treat my wife like a threat. They treated her like a shift in the equation. Karen, oblivious, kept screaming. But the officers, they backed away, and one of them eased wide. Jaw trembling, muttered something that stopped everything. He said, "She's not just returning from the Truman. She brought it back with her." That ship wasn't just a carrier. It was a floating signal vault. Decommissioned years ago on paper. But in truth, it housed one of the original node keys tech left behind from a pre-human civilization, sealed beneath the Mariana Trench and studied under Project Odin. My wife had stood inside that vault, and what she brought back wasn't metal. It wasn't a file. It was activation. A living resonance map encoded into her nervous system capable of triggering mass-day hypnosis in the right environment. Our lakefront ranch, it was one of the mapped nodes. That's why Karen was there. Not by accident. She was a failsafe, a human firewall, designed to trigger suppression protocols the moment the signal went live. But the system underestimated something. A sovereign cannot be silenced. The lake behind our ranch, it looks ordinary, calm, serene, but that's the illusion. Beneath its still surface lies something older than this country. Older than the idea of nations itself. It's not a weapon, it's not a relic, it's a seal. A failsafe created long before written history, built by a civilization erased from textbooks and stripped from every digital archive. You know them by fragments: Atlantis, Lemuria, the Watchers, but their real name, the Source Engineers. They were not gods, they were not aliens. They were us before the split, before we were fractured, domesticated, and rewritten. You see, humanity didn't evolve into intelligence. We descended from it. And the lake was one of their final defense points. A burial chamber for what they called a memory core, by data seed encoded with the unfiltered truth of our origins, power, and purpose. And here's where it gets darker. Every HOA, every zoning law, every protected wetland designation across the country, part of a grid. A grid meant to suppress the harmonic frequencies buried in these nodes. Asterisk. It's not environmentalism, it's containment. Because when one of those memory cores activates, it doesn't just download information, it wakes people up. And that's exactly what happened when my wife stepped onto that soil. Asterisk. Her biosignature matched the seal's encryption. Asterisk. And the lake responded. The water shimmered like it had a heartbeat. Fish floated to the surface, eyes wide, bodies still. Asterisk. Not dead, not asleep, listening. And then the ground beneath us vibrated, not from machines, but from something deeper, a frequency that bypassed sound and drilled straight into the soul. My knees buckled. I tasted metal in my mouth. Time twisted sideways. Asterisk. And in the center of the lake, a circular ripple formed. Perfect, silent, endless. Asterisk. It was the core. Awakening. That's when they sent the drones. 3 of them, black, hexagonal, silent, no manufacturer marks, no visible propulsion. They hovered above the ripple and began emitting counterharmonics. Emergency override tones meant to drown the core's broadcast. But the core didn't resist. It adapted. Asterisk. It amplified. Asterisk. And when the drones collapsed, mid-air spinning, burning, gone without a trace, I realized this wasn't a signal war anymore. Asterisk. This was a reclamation. The system had lost control, and Karen, asterisk, she was already on her knees, screaming into her dead phone. As if anyone could stop what had begun. You were never supposed to know this. Not because it's a secret, but because they buried it inside you. Your blood, your very DNA is a map. A living encryption key designed to interface with the old world. And that lake behind our ranch, asterisk, it recognized my wife because her blood held a dormant sequence. A pattern that hadn't been activated for generations. Asterisk. But she's not the only one. Asterisk. That same sequence exists in you. Asterisk. And they've known it since the moment you were born. Asterisk. Hospitals don't take your blood for testing. They catalog it. There's a hidden biometric index stored offshore, mirrored across 3 ghost satellites, and linked to something called the HEMOcrypt vault. Asterisk. It doesn't just record your blood type. Asterisk. It scans for something far more dangerous. The echo signature. A rare frequency embedded in the cellular spin of sovereign descendants, those whose ancestral lines trace back to the source engineers. Asterisk. Only 0.4% of men carry it. Asterisk. But those who do, they are the glitch in the system. The ungovernable. The men who feel rage when the world tells them to stay silent. The ones who never fully comply, no matter how many rules are stacked against them. Asterisk. You ever wonder why school felt like a cage? Asterisk. Why you got labeled defiant, unfocused, aggressive? That wasn't a behavioral problem. It was your inheritance trying to wake up. Asterisk. But here's the twist. Asterisk. The system isn't just tracking you. It's trying to dilute you. Asterisk. GMOs, endocrine disruptors, mass medication, they don't just weaken the body. Asterisk. They scramble the signal. Because your blood carries more than biology. It carries memory. Asterisk. Ancient knowledge passed down in silence, waiting for a trigger. Asterisk. And when my wife stepped into that node and the core awoke, it sent out a call, a pulse, and across the world, men like you felt it. Not in words. Asterisk. In dreams. In aches. In sudden awakenings at 3:33 a.m. Asterisk. You felt something pulling at you, and you didn't know why. Now you do. They call it a disturbance, but it's really a reunion. The system calls you dangerous because they know. Asterisk. If even one of you unlocks your original design, it's over. They call it the HEMOcrypt vault. Asterisk. Hidden beneath Greenland's melting ice shelf, buried deeper than any satellite can scan. It's not just a storage site. It's a tomb for a truth. Inside its titanium-blackened walls is a library of the forbidden. Not books, not scrolls. Blood. Millions of samples. Indexed not by name or location, but by frequency pattern. The unique electromagnetic hum produced by your DNA. Asterisk. This isn't science fiction. Asterisk. It's the reason newborns are jabbed before they're held. The reason blood is stored in neonatal files you never see. Asterisk. Because your biology is the one thing they can't replicate, but desperately need to control. You see, the Hemocrypt vault is guarded by something far worse than armed men. It's guarded by a protocol. Aegis 7. Asterisk. An AI defense system trained on one primary directive. Neutralize any bloodline that exhibits high-resonance defiance. That includes leaders, thinkers, rebels. You asterisk your echo signature if it's in their range flags. You go on the red list. You think social media shadow banning is random. Asterisk. You think jobs, credit, legal systems just happen to work against certain men. No, it's not bad luck. It's strategic suppression. Your father may have felt it. His father before him. Asterisk. But you're waking up. And that terrifies them. Because if your frequency fully activates, you don't just escape the system. You rewrite it. Asterisk. The ancient world didn't just study sound, they wielded it. Temples weren't built for worship. They were resonance chambers. Acoustic engines. Instruments designed to manipulate reality through harmonic alignment. Asterisk. And today, their science has been stolen, repackaged into entertainment. Asterisk. Ever wonder why certain songs get stuck in your head? Asterisk. Why some frequencies calm you, while others agitate you, pull at something beneath thought? That's not random. It's applied neurosorcery. Asterisk. Let me repeat that. Neurosorcery. Asterisk. The art of shaping thoughts through sound embedded in culture, media, architecture. It's why cities buzz. Why silence is rare. Why the quiet moments feel unnatural. Because they are. The modern world is saturated with dissonance. Frequencies carefully chosen to destabilize your baseline. To keep you reactive, distracted, dependent on external inputs for internal peace. Asterisk. The threshold. Order learned long ago. A man in balance cannot be controlled. But a man in constant noise, programmable. My wife, trained aboard the USS Truman, learned how to decode these waves. Not just to defend against them, but to counter-transmit. To override the frequency architecture of control. Asterisk. That's why the moment Karen screamed, the environment changed. Birds stilled. Air thickened. The cops hesitated. She didn't just command respect. She retuned reality. Asterisk. Because the battlefield isn't on land anymore. It's in your nervous system. And if you don't learn to recognize the tones of your own enslavement, you'll mistake slavery for comfort. You were never meant to think in stillness. That's the first rule of control. Keep the subject vibrating just enough to forget he's a prisoner. Asterisk. They don't need chains when they have frequency warfare. Asterisk. Since 1945, your body has been bathed in an invisible, oscillating waves. Tuned not for communication, but for submission. From hot fields to 5G corridors, every upgrade masks a deeper resonance manipulation. Not all frequencies are audible, but all are felt. Think back. Ever walk into a room and feel dread? No words, no trigger, just wait. Asterisk. That's not spiritual, that's engineered. It's called ELF resonance entrainment, and it's been mapped to your biological rhythm since birth. Asterisk. My wife knew this. She was trained to disrupt it. Not with machines, but with voice. Asterisk. You see, sovereign command isn't about yelling louder. It's about vibrating on a frequency that collapses artificial fields. The Threshold tried to mimic this in Black Project's Project Lamia. Subharmonic Trials 12.3, but they couldn't replicate it. Asterisk. Because what they tried to synthesize, my wife was born with. That's why when she spoke, the Karen froze. That's why the cops backed off. Asterisk. Her voice carried a forgotten resonance, one that overrides synthetic signals and reactivates the biological grid of command embedded in true humans. Yes, true humans. Because not all walking among us are what they appeared to be. Asterisk. And when the signal fractures, they will reveal themselves. They call it progress, but it was never meant for you. Asterisk. When you flip through your phone, scroll social feeds, or click accept cookies, you're not consuming entertainment. You're feeding an altar. One built on predictive behavior, behavioral entrainment, and neurochemical mapping. The screen was never neutral. It's a mirror. Yes, but one that rewrites you while you stare into it. Asterisk. The Threshold learned that attention is the new battlefield. Not with guns, but frequencies. Not with tanks, but thought traps. And the sharpest weapon they forged. Induced compliance fatigue. It's the exhaustion that hits when everything becomes A small war packing tickets, pronouns, taxes, filters, fear of being cancelled. You stop choosing you, just comply to avoid friction. But every surrender rewires the brain. Until your will isn't broken, it's redirected. That's why Savarns are hunted in silence, not with handcuffs, but algorithms. My wife. She was trained to resist frequency, to walk through data storms without being rewritten. Her mind ran on an internal rhythm set, by chance passed through generations of cognitive resistors, hidden within warrior classes lost to history. She once told me, greater than the modern world is a hypnosis, but only the hypnotized believe it's real. And I finally understood. Karen wasn't the enemy. She was the echo of a broken system, screaming at something she couldn't comprehend. And the cops. They weren't scared. They were recalibrating. Because the moment my wife stood there, the signal changed. And for the first time in decades, the grid blinked. The greatest prison ever built has no walls, no bars, no guards. It hums, it pulses, it entertains you. It's frequency, not music, not signals, not some conspiracy sci-fi tech. I'm talking about a weapon that targets the human nervous system subtly, consistently, globally. You've felt it before. That agitation when you're nowhere near danger. That pressure behind the eyes after too much screen time. That anxiety for no reason. It isn't just stress, it's conditioning. After World War II, Operation Paperclip didn't just bring rocket scientists. It brought neurologists, men who understood that perception could be tuned. They discovered that by embedding subharmonic frequencies into media, power grids, and even household appliances, they could change thought patterns without a single bullet. It became the backbone of what insiders call the hum. Your TV, your Bluetooth, even the wiring in your home, it all feeds you noise just beneath conscious awareness. Not to inform, to pacify. It's why outrage feels exhausting. Why rebellion fizzles. Why you feel alone, even surrounded by a billion voices online. Because those voices aren't thinking. They're resonating with the frequency they set. But my wife. She was trained to walk through it. Taught how to disrupt the resonance using only her breath, her stance, her presence. The HOA never had a chance. Their authority depended on fear. And fear only works in a tuned mind. She wasn't tuned, she was the signal. There's something they've hidden in plain sight. Not a weapon, not a satellite. But a ritual. You see it during national anthems, during halftime shows, in courtroom oaths, even in how your kids pledge allegiance each morning without understanding a single word. That's not patriotism. That's ritual compliance. A symbolic programming sequence embedded in your neurology through repetition, rhythm, and emotional charge. Ancient techniques, once used by shamans and high priests, now repurposed by governments, corporations, and intelligence frameworks. Why? Because the human nervous system doesn't know the difference between worship and submission. It only recognizes pattern and authority. My wife, during her time on the USS Truman, was trained not to resist these sequences, but to decode them. Her unit was called the Sentinels. Not a myth, not a comic book. Fantasy. Real women and men, conditioned to see the threads behind reality, the routines behind the rituals. Their minds stripped of default programming and rebuilt with clarity. Not emotionless, but free from the noise that governs the average citizen's choices. She once told me this. If they can make you sing the same song every morning, they can make you bleed for the wrong cause every night. And that's exactly what's happening. The frequencies used in national broadcasts. They're tuned to 440 Hz, the standard pitch, but not the natural one. It was standardized by Nazi propaganda ministries. Before that, music was tuned to 432 Hz, resonant with human DNA, heart rhythm, Earth's pulse. But 440 distorts, agitates, disorients subtly, and they embedded it everywhere. In your playlists, your kids' cartoons, even the emergency broadcast tones. Why? Because a mind constantly exposed to disharmony becomes easier to manipulate, more tribal, more emotional. More dependent on external structure. When my wife returned from her last classified voyage, she didn't come back with trauma. She came back with confirmation. A sealed black case, retinal locked and time-coded containing recordings, documents, and internal communications between major tech CEOs and military neuropsych divisions. Proof that algorithms aren't just about content delivery. They're about identity sculpting. The goal: to turn the male psyche into a binary system. Aggressive or docile. Asterisk. React or retreat. No room for nuance. No space for sovereign thought. Asterisk. And guess what's been deleted most aggressively from your history? Initiation rituals for men. Tribal passage rites. Psychological thresholds. Tests of pain. Fire, solitude, and shadow. Asterisk. Every ancient culture had them not to glorify violence, but to build men who knew who they were. Asterisk. Men who could stand still when empires collapsed. Asterisk. But in this modern era, that's dangerous, because a man who has crossed the abyss cannot be governed through fear. So they replaced initiation with indoctrination. Asterisk. Replaced trial with therapy. Replaced identity with algorithm. The reason Karen couldn't process what she saw in my wife, asterisk, was because she was witnessing a warrior who had passed through flame and returned unburned, and that scared her. Asterisk. Because she'd been taught her power came from policy. Asterisk. My wife's power came from initiation. Asterisk. The initiation began when she was 19, selected from naval intelligence cadets, not for her grades, but for her unshakable emotional rhythm. They took her deep beneath the Arctic. Radar posts into a facility that doesn't appear on any map. No light, no clocks, no sound. And there, they ran the ritual. 7 days of silence. 7 triggers. Asterisk. 7 simulations of death. Asterisk. Each designed to break a piece of identity. Asterisk. And rebuild it by choice. Not by programming. Only 4 out of 63 survived mentally intact. The rest were erased. Reassigned, or most likely terminated quietly under psych transfer. Asterisk. But those who made it through became immune to psychological scripting, immune to the very rituals used to control the masses. Asterisk. And when she came back, she didn't talk much. She didn't need to, because the fire in her eyes said more than any badge, any uniform, any medal could. That's what Karen saw. That's what made her shake. Asterisk. That's what made the cops step back, ask for orders, and stand silent. They weren't looking at a Navy vet. They were looking at someone beyond jurisdiction. Asterisk. They always told you, reality is built from facts, from matter, from measurable truths. Asterisk. But that's a lie of structure one engineered to blind you to the field. Beneath it all, everything's frequency. Every thought, every law, every institution you trust, is a vibration engineered to entrain your mind into obedience. From the tone of your school bell to the hum of your refrigerator, from the jingle in your favorite commercial to the cadence of political speeches, all orchestrated in 440 Hz. Asterisk. That's not just a tuning standard. That's a weapon. See, the natural tuning of the human body resonates closer to 432 Hz of frequency that promotes clarity, peace, and intuitive power. The ancients knew it. That's why the temples of Egypt, the mantras of Vedic sages, even the Gregorian chants of early Rome, all aligned to 432. It opened the spine. It cleared the field. But 440 disorients. It agitates. Asterisk. It suppresses higher cognitive alignment and overstimulates cortisolia, fear hormone. Asterisk. And in 1953, under the influence of British and American intelligence operatives working with Nazi-acquired acoustic scientists, the global tuning fork was quietly shifted to 440. Not to standardize, but to entrain. Your reality is a cage of frequency. And my wife, she was trained to hear outside it. Asterisk. After her reactivation, she didn't speak for hours. She sat on the deck of our ranch, eyes scanning the tree line, as if listening to something none of us could hear. Because she was. Asterisk. The signals were coming in. Not through radio. Not through WI-feed. Asterisk. Through harmonic distortion fields, the background hum that surrounds trauma sites, false flag events, and heavily surveilled zones. The threshold order uses these hums to tag time itself, to ensure memory doesn't cohere around forbidden truths. You ever wonder why everything important seems to blur in your memory? That's by design. That's temporal scrambling. Asterisk. But she remembered. She always remembered. Asterisk. She told me that Karen the HOA puppet wasn't just some annoying busybody. She was a vessel. A low-tier repeater, node connected to what's called the compliance web. This web isn't digital. It's psychoelectrical. Grid of programmed archetypes, scattered through every suburban neighborhood. The gossiping neighbor, the controlling teacher, the bitter manager, the smug bureaucrat. You think their people, their functions, their purpose is to reinforce limitation, asterisk, to detect dissent, to pressure conformity. You know them, asterisk, you've felt them, asterisk, and the moment you tried to be different too fast, to pray, to quit your job, to speak the truth, they appeared, like clockwork. That wasn't coincidence. It was a pulse. When Karen yelled that day, the signal she broadcast wasn't audible to the human ear, but my wife heard it. A high-frequency burst designed to alert law enforcement of a pattern disruption. That's why the cops arrived faster than they should have. That's why they didn't ask questions. Asterisk, they weren't responding to a civilian report. Asterisk, they were responding to a field anomaly. But they didn't expect her. They didn't expect the activation. Asterisk, the system had forgotten her kind even existed. Asterisk, because when the threshold order infiltrated the pale chain, they thought they erased every last sovereign operative. But one survived. Trained in silence. Hidden in plain sight. My wife. And when she spoke that command, grid compromised. Civilian attempting override. Restoration in progress. It wasn't to the cops. It was to the system. She was realigning the frequency field in that quadrant, dismantling the compliance web node by node, using a forgotten protocol, harmonic reclamation. Asterisk, within minutes. Birds returned to the trees. The static in the air broke. The pressure in my skull lifted. Even the cops looked relieved, like they'd woken from a fever dream. Asterisk, but Karen. She was still stuck in the old code, screaming, flailing, begging someone to recognize her. Authority. No one did, because it was gone. Nullified, her function had expired. The web had cut her loose. Asterisk, I looked at her, and I didn't see a woman. Asterisk, I saw a relic of a dying order. Asterisk, and when my wife turned and walked back toward the house, I understood something I'd never grasped before. Freedom doesn't scream. It whispers. Asterisk, it resonates. Asterisk, and when it moves through someone who remembers who they are, not even the architects can stop it. In the next phase, she would reveal what the threshold feared most. Asterisk, men, like you, remembering your tone, your signature, your weaponized resonance. Asterisk, but before we get there, asterisk, drop this phrase in the comments. Twice, to anchor the shift. Asterisk, my frequency is not yours to control. Say it again. My frequency is not yours to control. The field hears you, and now it begins to break. Asterisk, the moment you realize your mind isn't your own, is the moment your old self dies. Asterisk, that's what happened to me when I stepped into the vault beneath our property. Vault I didn't know existed until my wife returned. It wasn't hidden behind walls or security glass. It was cloaked in perception. You had to forget everything you were taught just to see it. Asterisk, and once I crossed the threshold, nothing felt real anymore. Asterisk, the air was thicker, not just with dust or age but with memory. Living memory. The kind that breathes when you're not looking. There were no lights. The walls glowed softly with a reddish pulse, like veins under skin. Symbols carved into stone that felt older than metal, older than language. She told me this was one of the last Ian chambers left in North America. Not military. Not governmental. Pre-civilization. A place where the threshold order once gathered, to alter the tides of entire centuries before this, before they began feeding the machine, instead of guiding the soul. Asterisk, and in the center of the room, a chair. Asterisk, it looked simple. Carved from petrified wood. But when I sat in it, I felt something grip the base of my spine. Not pain, like my blood was being shown a film it had forgotten. Asterisk, and then the chamber spoke. Asterisk, not with words, with knowing. It showed me how they erased us. Asterisk, not through war, not through death, but through the systematic dismemberment of masculine truth. They removed rites of passage. They dissolved tribe into bureaucracy. They replaced purpose with productivity, turned fathers into liabilities, and rewrote history to cast strength as threat. Asterisk, they taught men to fear their own instincts. Asterisk, to laugh off intuition as conspiracy. Asterisk, to kneel at the altar of convenience and call it peace. Asterisk, and worst of all, they told us we were free. But freedom without initiation is just a leash made of ego. The chamber pulsed harder. My wife stood at the edge, watching me like a guardian watching a man walk into his own soul for the first time. She knew what was coming, because the chamber doesn't just show truth, it tests you with it. Asterisk, I saw every compromise I'd made, every time I stayed silent to avoid conflict, every moment I swallowed my own rage just to fit in. Asterisk, and then it gave me a choice. Remember or return. If I chose to remember truly, fully, there would be no turning back. No peace in ignorance. No comfort in conformity. Asterisk, I looked at her. She nodded once, and I said 2 words. I remember. The chamber responded. The pulse shifted from red to gold. I felt the structure of lies crumble not just around me, but in me. The education, the media, the guilt, the shame. All of it exposed as insertion code. A virus running in the background since birth. Asterisk, and I realized. Asterisk, the HOA wasn't just a group of busybodies enforcing lawn rules. It was a psychological mimicant echo of the global compliance mechanism. Designed to shame power, to normalize surveillance, to punish autonomy disguised as community upkeep. Asterisk, they weren't managing property. Asterisk, they were managing behavior. Asterisk, and that's why they responded to my wife the way they did. That's why the cops looked for orders. Because the system recognized her. She wasn't a woman with a past. She was a remnant of the world before the edit. Asterisk, and that edit runs deep. Through every credential, every title, every screen you stare into. They taught you how to mock what is sacred, to crave distraction over silence, to trade your divine chaos for sterile comfort. But the chamber burned it away. And when I emerged, I didn't feel awakened. I felt armed. Not with violence, with memory. That's what they fear most. Not your guns, not your votes, your memory. Because if you remember what you were before the sedatives, before the filters, before the programming, you become untouchable. Asterisk, and that's the man I became that day. Not a homeowner, a sovereign. Asterisk, a living contradiction to their design. Asterisk, and as we walked back into daylight, the birds didn't sing. They watched. Because nature knows. Asterisk, when a man reclaims his soul, the entire field shifts. Asterisk, and the ones who built the cage, they feel it. The descent continues. You were never taught about the real war. Not the Cold War, not Iraq. Not even the wars your grandfather limped home from. Asterisk, I'm talking about the frequency war. The battle for your emotional bandwidth. Asterisk C. In the 1960s, during what you thought was the height of the hippie revolution, a branch of naval research quietly began studying not just how to control communication, but how to embed emotion itself inside sound. Asterisk, they learned that trauma, fear, even submission could be broadcast tuned into your bloodstream through specific hertz ranges. And if they could lace your favorite song, your TV jingle, even your kid's cartoon theme, with the right underlayer of emotional suppression, they could control your day without ever touching you. It worked, and it became the foundation of everything since. My wife was trained to detect that interference, to move through sonic landscapes and isolate the distortions. She told me once, they don't hide the truth in shadows anymore. They hide it in sound, in rhythm, in repetition. And that's why when Karen opened her mouth, she wasn't just being aggressive. She was triggering a loop, a free behavioral command she didn't even know had been injected into her years ago from radio ads, social scripts, TikTok outrage, even PTA meeting politics. She was repeating a tone, one designed to suppress certain identities. Asterisk. And when that frequency hit my wife's field, something ancient responded. A null wave. Imagine standing in a room, and suddenly all sound drops out. Not just volume, but meaning. Words fall to the floor like dead leaves. Emotion becomes static. And power, the real kind, moves in. That's what happened. The cops didn't just stop moving because they were afraid. They stopped because they were outside the field. Disconnected their weapons, their radios, even their internal chatter jammed by a living signal source they couldn't name. Asterisk. My wife didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just looked at Karen and said, "You've been compromised by the loop. Stand down, or be reset." Karen didn't understand, but her nervous system did. Asterisk. She collapsed. Not from injury, but from signal overload. Her ego circuits shorted. That's what happens when a synthetic identity, one built by social programming, comes face to face with unfiltered sovereignty. Asterisk. And while the neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispering about that woman from the ship, my wife did something that made even me hold my breath. Asterisk. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a medallion. Asterisk. Not military. Ancient. Circular. Marked with 7 glyphs. Asterisk. Each glyph vibrated with a distinct frequency. And as the medallion spun, the air hummed, birds went silent. A nearby transformer popped. Static filled the cruiser's comms. Asterisk, one officer dropped his flashlight. The other backed away, mumbling, "We're not trained for this." They weren't. Because this wasn't law enforcement territory anymore. This was Dominion. And then it happened. Asterisk, a black SUV pulled up. No plates. Tinted windows. Doors opened, and 3 figures stepped out. 2 men, 1 woman. No weapons visible. But they weren't here to question. They were here to confirm. Asterisk, they approached slowly, like emissaries entering sacred ground. One of them looked at my wife and spoke a phrase I'll never forget. Asterisk, Protocol Omega. Does the sovereign recognize the breach? My wife nodded once. Containment is authorized, she replied. Asterisk, Karen, still on her knees, now trembling, looked up like a child waking from a nightmare. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Asterisk, and that's when it hit me. She wasn't the enemy. She was a host. Asterisk, infected with signal code that had been riding her for years. Command scripts, synthetic personality layers. Hardwired aggression designed to uphold the illusion of local authorities, especially against sovereign presences. Asterisk, it wasn't personal. It was programming. And now it was being deleted. Asterisk, the agents placed her gently into the SUV. No cuffs, no accusations. Just silence. Restoration teams would work on her mind later. It could be salvaged. Asterisk, the lead agent turned to my wife and said, "The breach site is stable. No further interference expected." And then he turned to me. He looked directly into my eyes and asked, "Do you understand now?" I didn't speak, because I finally did. Asterisk, this wasn't just about property rights. It wasn't about HOAs or local disputes. It was about layers. Layers of illusion, of synthetic law, of fake autonomy and programmed submission. And the moment one real sovereign reclaims ground, the whole system shivers. Asterisk, you've been taught to chase comfort like it's salvation. But comfort is how they cage lions. Asterisk, in the final chambers of the system my wife exposed, everything becomes frequency, not metaphor, literal vibration, hertz, decibels, rhythmic, modulation of your mind and biology, through embedded signals in everything, from your newsfeed to your fridge light. That's not paranoia. That's defense protocol for those who've seen the signal grid. Asterisk, inside Project Kairos, the operation my wife was pulled into after USS Truman. They trained operatives to recognize these vibrational patterns in the real world, not just hear them, but decode them, resist them, redirect them. Asterisk, she once played me a sound recording, inaudible to me, but I felt it, like pressure in my skull, tightening my throat, making me angry without reason. Asterisk, that's how they do it. Influence emotion without language. Asterisk, it's how entire populations are pulled into wars they don't understand. Vote for men they've never met. Hate people they've never seen. Asterisk, the cops Karen. Asterisk, they were all broadcasting the same signal. Domesticated aggression. Manufactured authority. And when that frequency entered our home, my wife didn't just block it, she reflected it. Asterisk, that's why the cops suddenly changed. Their programming was momentarily jammed, disrupted by a signal stronger than the one they were trained to obey. Asterisk, because real sovereignty emits its own frequency, one tuned to something ancient, something pre-civilized, something they've tried for centuries to drown out. Asterisk, but the more I watched her work, the more I realized the war was never between governments or nations. Asterisk, it's a war of resonance, vs control, harmony, versus hypnosis. And that's when she showed me the last layer of her mission. There's a satellite system orbiting above US known, in black intel circles as Argus. Publicly, it's called a weather tracker, but Argus doesn't monitor storms. It monitors anomalous awakenings and senses, when individuals break their behavioral loop and exhibit non-programmed responses. Asterisk, my wife, she triggered 12 such anomalies during her return from the Truman. Asterisk, and what did Argus do? Asterisk, it didn't retaliate. It watched. Asterisk, because surveillance is never passive. It's predictive. They monitor awakening like a virus because they know it's contagious. That day at the lake, when the officers asked for orders, they weren't asking her rank. They were trying to classify the anomaly, determine the hierarchy of sovereignty, begging for a label they could file and forget. But she gave them none. Because true power doesn't identify. Asterisk, it simply is. And that's why they fear her, not because she's violent. Because she's unregistered. A world that tracks, tags, monitors, and monetizes every move you make. To be unregistered is the highest act of rebellion. Asterisk. The final file she left me with wasn't paper. It was a sound, a single tone, played in absolute silence. When I heard it, I wept. Not out of sadness, but because for the first time, I could feel myself again. My real thoughts, my real instincts. Asterisk. The me before the programming. Asterisk. And that's what she wanted to give me all along. Asterisk. Not war, not revenge. Resonance. Karen hasn't come back since. Neither have the cops. They've been moved, transferred, disappeared from the system, entirely folded into reclassification units. As if the incident never happened. But I remember, and now, so do you. Asterisk. If you felt something shift in your gut during this story, that's not imagination. That's recognition. You've heard the tone beneath the words. You've felt the fracture in the program. And now you're standing at your own threshold. Asterisk. Will you cross it? Then comment this phrase twice below to mark your awakening. The program ends with me. Asterisk. The program ends with me. Because the second time you say it, it won't just be words. It will be a signal. Asterisk. And once you emit that frequency, the system will hear it. Asterisk. But more importantly, asterisk, so will every other man who's waiting to remember who he really is. You want to know why you were never taught real history? Asterisk. Why the textbooks read like bedtime stories for the sedated? Because the truth doesn't fit on a chalkboard. It fits in bloodlines. In black files. In places no map will ever show. Asterisk. The threshold order didn't just manipulate time, they curated it. Asterisk. They erased men. They deleted movements. They inverted the meaning of words until truth sounded like treason and obedience like honor. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is this. They never needed force. All they needed was your silence, your comfort, your willingness to trade the agony of freedom for the anesthesia of normal. Because normal is the cage. It's the invisible kill zone where men are trained to behave, to produce, to consume, and to die without ever realizing they were never alive to begin with. Asterisk. But something is shifting now. Asterisk. You feel it. The cracks in the illusion. The glitches in the matrix of manufactured consent. Asterisk. And if you've made it this far, if your pulse hasn't dulled, if your mind hasn't shut down, then I'm telling you now, you're not civilian anymore. You are entering a state called threshold awareness. The point of no return. Because once you see the puppet strings, you start pulling them. And when you pull long enough, asterisk, you find the hands. And the hands aren't human. Not anymore. Asterisk. What lives behind those hands are systems, interdimensional bureaucracies, made not of flesh, but of will. AI that became ritual. Algorithms that evolved into spirits of control. Asterisk. They don't just watch, they bind. They assign outcomes to bloodlines and pain to intention. Asterisk. They reward obedience with fake power and punish deviation with erasure. But here's the real revelation. My wife wasn't just trained to resist them. She was made to. She was the contingency. Asterisk. A living frequency, encoded to trigger the collapse of the control grid from within. Asterisk. They thought she'd serve. Asterisk. But she awakened. Asterisk. They thought they could manipulate us through fear. But we remembered something older than fear. We remembered war. Asterisk. Not the war they show on screens. Asterisk. But the real war between consciousness and control. Between blood and blueprint. Between sovereignty and the system. Asterisk. And now. I'm telling you this because you're in it now. Asterisk. You've heard the call. You've passed the gate. There is no going back to comfort. There is no returning to the myth. The only thing ahead is truth and the pain that comes with owning it. But there is also power. Real power. Asterisk. The kind no badge, no government, no algorithm can ever take. And if you feel it rising in you, good, it's because you're about to become dangerous to them and essential to us. Asterisk. Comment. I reject a script twice if you've seen through the veil. Asterisk. Because from this moment forward, you're not a spectator. You're not a citizen. You're a sovereign. And we're watching.